What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. When I first came into the prison system in California, the Pelican Bay SHU was the prison that everybody talked about, right? It had this mythical legacy about it. It was the worst of the worst, and that's not a phrase that we as convicts came up with. That is what the prison administration and the government said repeatedly for many years about those housed in the Pelican Bay SHU. But think about it from our perspective, as affiliated people, the worst of the worst of the government is the best of the best to us, right? That's the cream of the crop. That's where all the big homies are. That's the White House, right? Uh, that's the nerve center of all that happens in on these yards in prison. And so, while San Quentin and Folsom and these other joints, these older ones have their own history and their own kind of legacy and stories about them. In my time, it was the Pelican Bay SHU. And through this video, if I say Pelican Bay, I'm talking about the SHU. I was never on the main line in Pelican Bay. I got to go back and visit guys that got kicked out of the SHU on the main line in the Bay many years after I was out of prison, but that's another story. But so the stories about Pelican Bay were crazy. And I had this mental image of what it was going to be like. And when I finally got there, because that's where I paroled from in 2005, it was very different than what I had expected in a lot of ways. And so today, I'm going to break down the fact versus fiction of Pelican Bay, but not from challenging what other content creators have said about it, more challenging my own expectations or comparing my own expectations with what the reality was. So there was only two ways to get to the SHU. And of course, the era I'm talking about is the era that I did time in, 96 to 2005. Okay. Things have changed now. I'll get to a little bit of that in a second. But there was only two ways to get to the SHU. One was to commit a felony while you're in prison. So if you stab somebody, you'll get a 15-month SHU. Do it a couple times, you'll get like a 2-year SHU. You get caught with a knife, you might get, 6 months. You get caught with dope, it could be 9 months. Do something in prison that is considered a felony and a major rule violation, and you will get a determinate SHU program where you got to go to the SHU for X amount of months. And a lot of times you didn't even do all of those months in the SHU. Those SHU terms, rarely did people go to Pelican Bay, right? I don't want to say rare, but it was not often that you would go do a determinate SHU term in the Bay. If it was a shorter one, like a year or less, you might do it in the ad seg of the prison that you go to, right? Every prison has its own administrative segregation unit. And so you get caught with a knife, you might go back and sit in a hole for 6 months and then get kicked back out to the yard or get sent to another prison. Or you would go to the Corcoran SHU or the Tehachapi SHU to do that set amount of time, and then you get released. You go out to a level 4 180 yard and go from there, right? Or you go to the SHU by being validated. And if you were validated as a prison gang member, you get an indeterminate SHU. And the whole mantra of parole, snitch, or die was real, right? If you got validated, you were not going to leave that cell until you paroled, snitched, or died. Thankfully, in my case, I had a release date. So that is the context through which I left. And the California Department of Corrections recognized a handful of groups as prison gangs, the Nuestra Familia, the Northern Structure / Nuestra Raza. We called ourselves Nuestra Raza, but everybody else called us Structure, so we started calling ourselves Structure. That's what I was validated as a member of. Then, of course, the Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla Family, which isn't even considered a prison gang in California anymore, and I'm working on some content around how they accomplished that. And the Aryan Brotherhood. After I was in prison a while, I think like 99, 2000, somewhere around there, they added the Nazi lowriders to the list. But so if you were labeled as a member and associate of one of those groups, you were done, right? You just went to the SHU and that was it. So considering those were the only ways to get to the SHU, not a lot of people actually made it to Pelican Bay, and that led to, I think, a lot of the stories and a lot of the fiction and the myths that we heard. I heard that you read your mail on a screen, that they roll the shower up to your door, that all of the biggest, most violent, most corrupt and sadistic COs were sent to Pelican Bay, right? Which is way up at the Oregon border. Were sent to Pelican Bay, and you essentially just got tortured all the time, right? They just were on you. And then also that's where all the big homies were, so in my mind, as somebody that got involved with the politics pretty early in my prison stay and got very committed to that stuff, I thought, man, that's where you're around the elite, right? Like these are the elders of what we're pushing as norteños and as structure, right? And so all this education that we do and all this militancy and all this discipline and all this professionalism and all this other stuff, that the people there, right, the homeboys in the Bay are that times 10, you know? And so little did I know, right, pulling up there, that was not the case, right? And the reality is, no, you get your mail just like anybody else. It can take a long time to get your mail, and they will snatch your mail from you. But there are no screens to read it on. Um, they don't roll the shower, right? There's a shower at the end of every tier. Um, the guards, I mean, when you get off the bus in the Bay, I think those are some of the biggest guards ever. I don't know where they found those dudes. They were built like those big ass trees that you pass on your way to Pelican Bay. And they're mean, right? Don't get me wrong. There's some mean dudes. They don't beat up everybody. They might pick a couple people to choose. But what tripped me out is I never remember seeing those COs specifically, the ones that meet you when you get off the bus. I don't know if they worked the main line or if that was their only job to kind of be the welcoming committee getting off the bus. But the actual COs that I encountered in my unit and stuff, I never saw any of them big ass dudes, right? So I don't know what happened to them, but it all that stuff was nonsense. But what I wasn't prepared for was the actual reality of it, and like I said, a lot of people didn't make it there, so they could make up stories. I started my time on a level 3 yard. It's not likely that a lot of people on a level 3 yard in 1997 had been to the Pelican Bay SHU. There were some old school guys that did SHU terms in Vacaville and stuff, way back. But not a lot of those guys go there because if you go to the SHU program for a determinate time, you get kicked out to a level 4 yard. And then you got to be good for so long and your points got to drop. And there's dudes that have 200 and 300 points. It's going to take many, many years of you being a model inmate, losing, 6 points a year, 8 points a year, I think, to get down to under 54 points, which is what you would need back then to be a level 3. So should have known there was a bunch of hogwash, but you're a kid coming in the system. I was 19 years old. I didn't know no better. You tell me this is how it is, I believe you. Joke was on me. But so walking in, nothing prepared me for that. It looks different than any prison I had ever been in. I don't think there's any other prisons in California that are built the way that the Bay is. I had done, time in a Corcoran SHU, and that was different than some other places that I had been. But nothing like the Bay. Long ass hallway, like you feel like you're in a movie, and the housing units, the housing section is so small. There's only 8 cells, with a shower at the end of the first tier and the end of the second tier. Nowhere else in prison do you have a tier with 4 cells on it, right? There's 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Nowhere else that I know of is it like that. So the hustle and bustle that exists in a normal prison environment, even in the ADSEG or even in the SHU, people shooting lines and that kind of stuff. When I first got there, I made a fishing line because that's what you do when you first go to a prison, right? First thing you do is search the cell, try to see if there's any contraband, if they got any little hidden spots, anything else, because whatever's in there, you're gonna get cracked for when they search. And you clean the cell, and you make a line, right? So I made a line. I never needed it. People popped out, they'd pass stuff. Your unit is so small. Very, very rarely do you actually fish with somebody. Like, they're all right there, and people get popped out every day to go to yard, so you could ask them to pass stuff. The unit that I was in, the pod I was in, was very respectful, and most everybody was from Southern California, right? Raza from Southern California. There was one guy downstairs who was a northerner, and he was cool. He was kind of J Caddis, but he was cool. But other than that, it was all people from Southern California. That was the other thing that was different. You know, I was raised to think of this group as my arch rivals, the enemy, the ultimate opposition. And instead, the first person I see in the SHU is this guy with a huge hand on his chest, right? Who gives me the greatest care package walking into a place that I'd ever gotten. You know, like it was love. Magazines, books, soups, writing stuff, stamped envelopes, like you name it, everything I needed to get me by for a few days, some coffee. And I was like, damn, that was very generous, right? And so I was like, hey, when I get my property, you know, I got you. And he's like, hey, don't worry about it because somewhere back here, one of my people is pulling up and one of your people is doing the same, man. It all evens out. And I was like, well, I thought these dudes were supposed to be the devil, you know? And so that was different. To actually encounter people that previously you'd only heard about because guys at the top of the food chain aren't out on the main line. So you hear about them, but you don't see them. Things are different now. They're all out on the main line now, and we see what's happening. But so that was different. These people that I had unrealistic expectations of on my own side, right, from my own team, they didn't live up, man. They didn't live up. You know, a lot of them were very petty. The idea of carnalismo was pretty much out the window. It like they couldn't be bothered. You know, if you weren't on their level, you weren't particularly relevant. And I know it's different depending on where you're at and who's there. You know, in my case, I had some unpleasant exchanges with this dude Charles Oak from Stockton, also called Peanut, who was an NF member but also was an informant. So didn't know he was an informant at the time, obviously. So he was in a position of authority, and he didn't really like me, and I didn't really like him either. You know, and I had just come from Corcoran. My cellie in Corcoran was an NF member. There was a lot of NF members in the Corcoran SHU, and my cellie had reinforced what I had learned prior to going to the SHU, right? That you have a voice. Be careful of your voice. Be careful of what you say and how you say it. Stand on what you say, but you have a voice and know your teaching, know what you're committed to, stand on that, and you can't go wrong, right? That is not what it's like in the Bay, to be quite honest with you. Them dudes ain't trying to hear that shit, right? And and so I just was thrown off. The whole vibe was different. And I've talked to plenty of people that have been in the SHU, and different people, just speaking from the north, have different experiences. And it's all about who you land next to, who you land in a pod with. You know, some have a great experience, you know, others not so much. And so it's kind of the luck of the draw. You don't think that going in. You know, you don't realize that it's really a crapshoot. And and you got to deal with where you are. You're not gonna move, right? Odds are you're not gonna move. And I didn't. You know, I stayed in the same place for the years that I was in Pelican Bay. And so that all was different. But also the nobody can prepare you for the isolation. There's been a lot of studies done now on sensory deprivation and everything else, and the long term effects of solitary confinement. And it's true, it's real. I am very noise sensitive. If I'm trying to study and focus on something, and I hear a TV on in another room where I can't even make out the noise, I can't make out the words being said, but I hear it, I will fixate on that and zero in trying to hear what's going on in this TV program that I could give two shits about. But it's like a hyper fixation, right? It's a noise sensitivity. And I think it comes from being in the Bay where you're alert to every sound. You know, if your neighbors are talking, if they happen to have a celly, and they're talking to their celly, odds are you can hear little bits of that conversation. And it's in your best interest, right? To ear hustle, because you never know what you're gonna hear. Um, if you can hear stuff going on in other pods sometimes. And so you ear hustle, man. What is that? What are they doing over there? Uh Everything is so quiet and there's such little things to even make noise that anything that does make noise you zero in on and you focus on. and trying to break up your routine. I went years, I'd go like a year folding my clothes one way, and then I'd switch it up and roll them like they do in the military instead of fold them, just to do something different, right? I'd sleep on the top bunk, and then 6 months later, I'd move and sleep on the bottom bunk. I didn't have a cellie. A lot of people in Pelican Bay didn't have cellies by the time I got up there because a lot of folks had been blasting their cellies. And so Pelican Bay was like, no, that's it. And if you have any prior history of in-cell violence, you were getting single cell. And when I was in Solano the first time I ever went to ADSEC, I had in-cell violence. I had cellies after that. I had cellies after that in Solano, right? My cellie dropped out. And the guy that I got into it with, and then I wound up having cellies there, cellies in Salinas Valley, cellies in the Salinas Valley ADSEC, my first time. Second time I was on walk alone because I was validated. Cellies in a Corcoran SHU. But I got to Pelican Bay, they were like, nope, no celly. So you're sitting in this tomb, and there's like a social death. It when you go to prison, you know that you don't really matter to the streets anymore. That's just the reality. You come to terms with that reality pretty damn quick, right? Them motherfuckers don't care about you, right? They're living their life. And okay, cool. Going to the SHU and going to the Bay, it's like, damn, even people in prison don't care about me. Like the the people, there's nobody fucking there. There's those other 7 cells, and that's it. And it's the same people, you know. While I was there, I seen, Jacko Padilla from Azusa was cellies with my neighbor. He wound up leaving, and it ultimately wound up other stuff happening with him, and he lost his life. And downstairs, I had Caja from the Avenues, was sold up with Cyclone from Santa Monica. They came in and snatched up Caja. They had this whole indictment. That was the only movement that happened in my years in the Bay. Other than that, everybody stayed put, right? It's just different. And it's hard to put into words, again, the isolation and the feeling of really being buried, there's no windows. You go outside, the walls are 30 feet high. I remember we got like was it like frost, not frost, but like hail. Hail had accumulated in the corner of the wall on the outside yard, right? And a lot of you guys that follow the prison genre have seen these images and seen pictures and stuff. In my day, you didn't see any of that. There was a media blackout when it came to Pelican Bay. There was no reporters coming by. There was no mental health people. There was none of that. All that is courtesy of the Asker settlement and the media scrutiny and the experts and the courts and everybody coming in and kind of blowing the lid off of what was really happening in Pelican Bay, and ultimately ending long-term solitary confinement in California. But in my time, none of that there's years prior to any of that being thought of, right? And so, but you go out to those yards, and because the walls are so high, it rained a lot in Crescent City, but it wouldn't really rain on the floor. And when the sun came out, the sun never touched you because the walls were so high and it came at an angle. Like you'd see it on the wall, but it'd be 10 feet above your head. And that's why we all look like sickly cancer patients, like just look like you had one foot in the grave. And you don't realize it when you're there because everybody looks the same. You come home and you're like, oh my God. And people looking at you weird, like, damn, is that fool okay? But anyways, that hail accumulated in the corner. And I remember Tortuga from Colton, who I did a video or reaction to him doing a podcast not too long ago. And he looks a lot better, a lot healthier, a lot happier. But he came in from the yard with it. And it's like this little ice, right? It's hail, basically. And he came around to all the cells and showed everybody. And it was so exciting. And the idea that that's the highlight, not just of the day, but fuck, man, we talked about that for months. You're dead back there, really. And the stuff that you have to do to try to prevent yourself from going crazy, the routines, the discipline, the switching things up. I'll do burpees for a few months and then I'm gonna focus more on rolling up my mattress and lifting it. I'm jump on the block. I started doing yoga, right? Like anything to kind of do stuff different and to stay mentally sharp. And you read books and you start studying intently. and hyper fixating on stuff just to keep your mind occupied. And you're not sitting around kumbaya with all these big homies studying and learning and doing all this. No, no, that's not what's happening. You're sitting in your cell every day, right? And you're getting shitty food and you're going to walk around in the same fucking rectangle, and that's it. And think about even in the Asker settlement when they were negotiating, they were like, hey, can we have a handball wall and a pull-up bar? That was a huge difference, right? Huge difference on the yard, I'm sure. Um, so the idea that things like that, such minimal stuff, would be consequential in these negotiations goes to show you just how rough it was, right? And again, it's impossible to explain. Um, and now, like I said, everybody has heard about the SHU and the different conditions in there and stuff, and a lot of guys have been let out to the yard, and I'm assuming I think at some point that California is going to bring back solitary confinement, right? Something like the SHU, because of all the violence and stuff out there, and people see the effects of these leaders, these guys that were locked back in the SHU for a long time, and not every one of them, of course, but some of them have gone out to the yard, and now these dudes on the yard who have never been around these people are getting to see how they get down and what their priorities are and how they feel about certain things. And I think it's been a culture shock to folks. Like, damn, I didn't realize this is how they were. You didn't really experience that again unless you went to the Bay, right? And for those of us that went there, we're watching from afar, like, I mean, seen that coming, right? Uh, but it's radically changed what it looks like to be on an active yard in the state of California. And so I think they're gonna bring the SHUs back. I don't know that they'll use Pelican Bay specifically. I think if they do, uh, if they say that they're gonna start putting people back in cells like this, not cells like, but like this cell, um, I think you're gonna see a lot of people hang up the gloves, man. Uh, People don't want to go back to that, and I did a few years up there. There's guys that did 10, 15, 20 plus. Uh, and now they've had some years of being outside and being able to walk the track, and they got entourages and they got people around. I mean, even the guys that ain't top of the food chain, because most of the people in the Pelican Bay SHU weren't that guy. Most of us were irrelevant. Pelican Bay will humble you, right? It will put you in your place. Like I said before, I thought I had a voice. I didn't think I was some big shot, but I thought I was relevant. And then you go to Pelican Bay and realize, no, you're not. You're really not. Um, there's only a few people that are relevant, and you ain't one of them. And it's a humbling experience. It'll put you in your place. And again, I think folks are experiencing that out there now too. But a lot of the guys that were in the SHU, most of us that were validated, weren't that guy. They don't have entourages now out on the main lines, And salute to them. They're getting family visits, and a lot of them are getting parole dates and getting to go home. And the recidivism rate is ridiculously low for those guys. And this is part of the reason why. You know, um, that whole experience in Pelican Bay changed my thinking. I never wanted to go to the Bay, but I expected to go there. I figured it was a natural progression of my behavior in prison. Eventually, I'll end up there. And I thought when I got up there, it would be this wonderful experience. And it sounds goofy, but I mean, I was already in prison, so I didn't expect freedom. And I thought it would be something other than what it was. And my time there got me rethinking, like, what do you want to do with your life? And again, I was fortunate to have a release date. And I did not make a lifetime commitment in prison. I made a commitment while I was in prison, but that didn't extend to the streets. And I was like, I'm cool. I'm validated. If I catch another case, I'm coming right back here. And I'm kind of over it, Humps. Right? I'm going to try. I'm going to put a serious effort into leaving prison and not returning. And I don't wish Pelican Bay on anybody, to be quite honest. But in terms of deterrent, I guess it worked. I guess it worked. So there you have it, man. The reality is much worse than all the nonsense that I had heard. Uh, but it's worse in ways that's hard to convey to somebody that hasn't been there, you know. So, anyways, help others move with excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And let me know what you guys think, man, in the comments. And stay tuned. I'm gonna try to grind it out for the last 10 days of this month. Take care.